Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in this world. And thanks for joining us today on this DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, the moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. Before we get started on the event, I do have a few housekeeping items I'd like to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded. So if you miss any or all of today's event, please know that you will receive a link post-event to the webinar on demand, and you can listen to it then. We also will be taking questions throughout the event. So if you have a question at any time, please feel free to use that question section in the control panel, easy for me to say, and we will take about 15 minutes or so near the end of the event and go through those questions. We also have 3 polling questions that will be occurring throughout the webinar today. So we're hoping that everybody attending today's event will participate in the polls, and we will let you guys know when those come up as well. Okay, so let's get right into today's webinar. Top 5 considerations for DevOps success in 2018. A really fascinating webinar topic, and I hope everybody gets a lot out of it. Our speaker today is Daniel Grusso, who's the product manager at CollabNet. Welcome, Daniel. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much, and thank you everybody else for joining. So as we've stated, today we will be covering the top 5 considerations for DevOps success. My name is Daniel Grusso. I am a product manager at CollabNet. I focus mainly on our DevOps platform and all the DevOps integrations of all the tools within our platform. Okay, so let's get started. As we mentioned earlier, you can submit questions through the webinar, through the control panel of GoToWebinar. You will see there at the bottom section a feature where you can enter any question you may have, and we will be sending all the information post-webinar. We encourage you to join the conversation as well on Twitter using the hashtag DevOps. Okay, so we'll start the webinar today by touching on the success criteria of DevOps, as well as the top 5 considerations for DevOps success in this coming year. Okay, so let's start with a poll question. You can answer the poll question at the bottom portion of the GoToWebinar control panel. So we'll have about a minute for the answers to come in. And the question is, how often do you introduce change to your software development process? And that is any portion of the process that you use to develop software, how often do you introduce change to it? And this is at any stage of the process. So if you think about from the time that ideas are being distilled down from leadership team or product management, all the way down to the final release into production, how often do you introduce change into that process?
Okay, so we've got 3 answers there. We've got seldom, once or twice a year or less, intermediate, once a quarter, or often monthly to weekly. And looks like we've got about 61% of folks who have voted. So we'll give you guys about 10 seconds longer to get your answer in, and then we'll take a quick look at those poll results. All right. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll right now. Okay. Looking at the poll results, let's see if I can get them out here. There we go. So it looks like we've got the majority of attendees answered often, monthly to weekly. What do you think of those results, Daniel?
That is really, I'm really glad to hear that people are not afraid to introduce change to their software development process. So a lot of the things that we see here at CollabNet through our services engagement is that that is often the source of not being able to see enhanced results, is the inability to introduce change because how disruptive it is. So I'm really glad that we have a very progressive audience today.
Excellent, excellent. All right, I'm going to hide these results now and let you get back to it.
Excellent. Okay, so before we dive in, let me get this slide. Okay. Before we dive into the 5 themes, let's take a moment to talk about the success criteria for DevOps. So there's currently a misguided belief that the ultimate goal is to release software every second of every day. So, basically as often as you can. And while that may be the right goal for some companies, like let's say Amazon or Netflix, there may be many companies for whom this goal may not be right. So there is no one criteria that fits all. The success criteria for your DevOps implementation is very, very personal. So the core tenet of DevOps is to have a strong organizational culture that allows you to enact change as you see fit and evaluate outcomes, and then just basically adjust and repeat. So with that said, embracing change is a must, and doing so will help you master the most important skill of all, and that is the ability to improve. So DevOps is all about continuous improvement, realized through changes both big and small, but ultimately the goal is to continuously improve the flow of work through the value stream in order to improve how you deliver value to your customers. And as I said, we only realize that through change. Okay, so before we get started with the 5 main themes, let's take a second to answer our second poll. And this question is, how often does your organization deploy releases? And this is directly to a production environment where customers can interact with them. So let's go ahead and start with that poll.
All right, so we've got what level of autonomy do business stakeholders in your organization have to audit progress of initiatives? Let's go ahead and launch that poll here.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
sorry.
Okay, want to make sure we're both on the right one.
Correct, yes. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself here.
No problem at all. So the poll is up on the screen now. Go ahead and make your selection. We've got 3 choices. None, they must reach out to dev to get their progress report. Some, they can access data sources which are updated manually. And full, they access data sources updated automatically based on development programs. So let's go ahead and give you guys a couple seconds longer. We've got about 60% of folks who have voted so far. So we're making good progress on this one. Yay. All right. I'm going to give you guys 4, 3, 2, 1, and then I'm closing the poll. Okay, let's go ahead and share the results here. Take a look at them. Okay, looks like the majority of our audience today said that they have some autonomy. What do you think of those results, Daniel?
Yeah, so I do think that some tends to be typical. We do see more of the time that none is the norm. So I'm glad to see that most of people have some access. And what we see here through our services engagements is that they always have to reach out to an individual to gauge progress, and that there's not complete transparency as to the progress of initiatives. So we'll be talking about that as well during the webinar.
Excellent, excellent.
Okay, so let's get to it. The first theme is making the work visible. So the goal of every company in the software development space is to deliver value to customers, you kind of get that value to the end user, and basically get better at doing that over time. So this continues to be challenging. In all the engagement that we see, in all the experiences that we've had, we've seen that this is never straightforward. And the main reason for this is that the work is not visible. So the same problem that we've seen and we've stated during the poll is that only some work is visible and some progress is visible. This causes the work to not only take longer, but it causes misalignment within companies as well. Which ultimately leads to longer development cycles, a lot of times rework because of miscommunication. And lastly, the thing that we see the most is that companies don't use tools or methods to visualize their entire value stream or the value flowing through it. And that is kind of the most important thing we find. So let me show you an example of a value stream. So this is from Gene Kim's the Phoenix project. And this is taking the time to sit down and get all the parties involved in the software development process in the same room and going through what the software development process is and agreeing on all the steps that we follow. In order to make the work visible, all the teams must convene and agree that the current process is what's being followed from idea all the way to delivery. And once the process is agreed upon, so effectively once a value stream has been mapped, we must visualize the work that is flowing through that value stream. And this helps drive DevOps success, and it will provide not only alignment, but really a common understanding of the process, and this will allow us to be more successful. So some companies use physical means to address this problem. A lot of times what we see is whiteboards with post-it notes, since there is not one system that can aggregate that, or that used to be the case. And now with modern platforms, we see that there are systems that aggregate the data from all the different sources. And a more advanced implementation of it would be exactly that, having a digital representation of your value stream, not only of the faces and the activities and the controls, but also the value that is flowing through it. Okay, let's move on to the next theme. The next theme is using a common currency for value across the enterprise. So what this means is that different parts of the enterprise use different currencies to measure the work that is being delivered to the end user. So let's say the business may use portfolio items or features that are generally distilled or broken down all the way to a user story. And development or ops, they may use things like releases, versions, packages, binary artifacts, and that's how they measure the value delivery to end users. So there's a big disconnect there of what we use in each part of the company. So in order to be able to use a common currency, we find that the most effective way to do that is affiliating code commits to whatever atomic value of business value you want to use. So we find that the most effective unit of business value to be used in DevOps implementations is work items. So that is kind of a common currency that we can share both from the business, if you think about how portfolio items get distilled all the way down into a user story, and in development. So when we are actually doing code commits, we can affiliate code commits to those stories, to those work items, which is, basically the business value. And in that way, the business can use a common currency to track and measure progress. So enabling code to inform the progress and movement of business value as it flows through the value stream empowers not only business stakeholders, but also everybody on the development and operations side of the house to obtain that code-driven, data-driven information on business objectives. So there's nothing more efficient to have code inform our business initiatives. That is really how we can use that common currency across companies. All right, so let's move along to the next theme. The next theme is measurement. So over the past couple of years, we've seen a lot of companies buying tools and changing processes and spending a lot of money in their DevOps initiatives. However, there's no measurement to speak of. And this is something that should be in your minds at the start of your DevOps implementations. So while the tools that we buy and the tools that we bring on to our DevOps initiative, they may offer some measure or some measurement. We really need to measure the entire flow of value across the full value stream, not only in one phase or in one area. We really need to measure it end to end, from the time that we come up with an idea or that portfolio item gets created or that initiative gets created all the way to delivery. The second thing that I want to talk about here is that it's also important to embrace a real baseline. That's so important. Even if it's not a good baseline, even if your performance is less than what you would like it to be, you absolutely have to start with a baseline, because once we measure a baseline, we can really see how the change that we're enacting is affecting our process. So measuring the process in the different phases of our value stream will allow us to identify areas of opportunity and bottlenecks that may be part of our process. And that basically allows us to identify areas that are ripe for change. If we don't measure that, we wouldn't be able to see those sort of things. So the most common place to start here are with lean metrics. This is something that is common across all the shops that do software development. So one metric could be cycle time. That is, how long does it take for value to make a full trip across the value stream? So let's say from the time that we have an idea and we turn that idea into something tangible like a work item, how long does it take for that work item to make it across the value stream all the way into the user's hands? And since we're measuring value in terms of work items, we can see how long it used to take a story to make it through last month versus, let's say, this month after we've enacted some change. So other common metrics to start with would be efficiency, and that is kind of touch time versus wait time. And what that means is basically the time software packages are actually being worked on versus the time that they are simply sitting out there in an environment waiting for someone to interact with it. One final one would be batch size, and that is how many work items or how many stories and defects are contained in any given software release. And what we should aim for here is to decrease batch size, and that will allow us to reduce defects and any sort of introduction of a failure that may be catastrophic. So smaller batch size is what we really want to aim for here. Those are just three good ones to start with, but as I said, modern tools kind of have this built in and will allow you to measure many more. Okay, so let's take a break here and answer our last poll questions. And that is, how much measurement do you currently perform around your software development process? And that is from the time that the leadership team may have an idea all the way to when it's distilled to a user story and finally delivered to the customer's hands. How much do you measure of that process?
Okay, and again, we've got three answers here. We've got none. No metrics are currently available, and I sure hope that nobody chooses that one. We also have some, which is limited metrics are available, and full. Every relevant metric is captured. And we've got a lot of folks who are voting on this one, that's for sure. We're up to about 69%, so we'll give you guys about 10 seconds longer, and then we'll close this poll out. Take a look at the results. And let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, we're closing the poll. And let's take a look at the results here. Looks so wow, 75% said some limited metrics are available. So Daniel, I'm not sure if that's good or bad. Maybe I don't know if maybe we should be having more of the full folks saying that that they have every relevant metric captured, but it's actually kind of sad to see that that's the least that garnered the least number of responses. But what do you think?
Definitely. You know, I would expect to see that the investment we make in our DevOps implementation gives us full visibility into all of the metrics that we're hoping to capture. So one thing is that we may not be looking at them on a daily basis, but we should definitely have access to all of them, to at least every relevant metric. So the fact that the majority of people only have access to some is definitely concerning. That is an area that we feel if you're not measuring this, you don't really, you can't really identify where change would be most impactful. So, you know, if one thing that leaves you is just go out there and see what, you know, what changes you can make so you have full visibility into every relevant metric. And there may be metrics that are vanity metrics that, you know, we've been talking about that for a while. And those may be not as important to capture. But all those lean core metrics are absolutely basic to capture so that when you enact change, you can see how those metrics are impacted. And that may definitely be part of kind of the DevOps platform that you're running, or it may be just part of the practice. It may be a number of things. But I would definitely encourage everyone to go that route.
So it's a little disconcerting to me that we have like 17% of folks say that they have no metrics available to them. Do you, what do you think about that? I mean, it seems, that number to me seems a little high.
Absolutely, 17% having, so I thought we were only divided between some and full. Definitely, if you have no access to any metrics in your DevOps implementation, that is kind of throwing good money after bad. If you don't, or if you cannot measure the impact that you have with an investment that you have done, this means that basically this investment may have been for naught, because it may be good, it may be bad, it's anybody's guess. So really, if you don't have any visibility into any metrics, that would be kind of my first order of business is this investment that I have made into my DevOps and my value stream, having some visibility into what impact that is having.
Okay, well, I guess at the end of the day, some is better than none, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right, I'll let you get back to it now.
Okay. So let's talk about our next theme, and that is configuration as code. This is more and more popular as we go into DevOps engagements, and we see that basically everyone wants to capitalize on this. So the business investment that we make in version control, so not only tools but also practices, this is not an investment where we say we pay a monthly fee to a company that gives us a version control tool. The investment that we make in our developers and the practices that we follow, if you follow Git flow or the kind of branching strategy that you follow, we put a lot of time and thought into these things, and that is basically an investment. Anytime that we're spending time to refine our process is a big investment. So this should not only be limited to the way we build production applications. This should be extended throughout your entire value stream. So, for example, enterprises invest in modern tools, and they give us features such as, federated security, advanced RBAC, things like this. We need to leverage this investment across the entire DevOps infrastructure. So this is an important aspect in managing changes to functionality and performance of deployable components. This is not only writing code that's going into a production application. So the ultimate goal is to version everything that is touched in the software development process. Properly versioning all the configuration changes allows for speedier deployments, and basically when we have an error, we can roll back without much effort because everything was versioned. So I can't tell you how many times I've seen that there's kind of an error or an ill-conceived change in the configuration of an application, and there is no easy way to roll back. So basically, we have to rely on a lot of tacit knowledge. So go talk to Bob because he worked on this tool, or go talk to Jim because he has knowledge around this area, and that is simply not something that is sustainable and should not be practiced in the modern software development world. So it's important that the tools we choose for our stack have strong domain-specific languages so that developer adoption takes place in a more friendly way. And, basically that's what we've seen out there, is that when we have strong DSLs, developers are much more likely to adopt the tools in our DevOps stack. And that goes as well as a comprehensive REST API that lowers the barrier of entry to integrate these tools with the rest of our tool chain. So having a strong API allows us to leverage this investment that we may have in a federated DevOps platform. So the ultimate goal here is that each code push becomes kind of a snapshot of the configuration of the entire stack. And this enables benefits such as, like I said, simpler rollbacks. You can have fully isolated environments, and this is something that we see more and more today. So the cost of computing has gone down in a way where it is really trivial for us to stand up entire environments, just let's say for the sake of a single user story or a single feature. So having configuration as code will allow us to do things like that, and ultimately faster and more frequent deployments, which is where we want to get to. And that is every time that there is value realized, and that is code written by a developer that satisfies a business requirement or a user story, the longer that we sit on that story not being released into production is basically the more risk that we have in introducing more issues into production. So ultimately, we want that time to be the least amount of time possible. Okay, so our last theme is compliance. And this is the process of ensuring the deliverable elements of the software development process are in compliance. And this used to take place after the software was done. So after we went through our development, our testing, and then prior to handing it into production, we used to hand it to a compliance team, or let's say a compliance officer. And this practice generates unnecessary risk and waste. So when the deliverables have to be sent back to either development or compliance to go through one more round of testing because some detail was missed, it's basically money being lost. So this should be absolutely incorporated into your value stream. So, and that's what we see in modern practices. In modern practices, we see that teams are embedding the compliance aspect of software development into their value stream. And what that allows them to do is to avoid rework first and waste second. So on the image on this slide, you can see that compliance activities occur in parallel to the development and testing work, as opposed to when the release is marked done or code complete, and then happening outside of the value stream. So modern DevOps platforms allow you to build all of the activities of your software development process basically into the different phases that you have. And you don't have to have anything happen outside of it that may generate waste. And the goal here is that we must have the confidence that every software release that comes out of our value stream will be fully compliant, and we can deploy it into production at any time with the confidence that all the checks and balances have taken place. Okay, so that does it for our top 5 considerations, and we will now take some questions from our attendees.
Great,
so remember
great.
that you can post the questions on the control panel.
Yeah, excuse me, we've gotten a lot of really great questions in so far, but it's not too late. We have plenty of time for questions here. So if you do have a question for Daniel, please feel free to use that control panel, get your question in, and hopefully we'll be able to get to it. Our first question is from Eugene, who asks, how does quote unquote work item measure value?
So that is a great question. So when we talk about coming into a common understanding of measuring value across the enterprise, is value that we deliver to end users. So a work item by itself, of course, would not measure much value. It is the affiliation with actual code that allows that work item to measure value. So when we invest in one of our teams to write code to satisfy a user story or a feature or a portfolio item, that is what we call value, and that is value to be realized by our customer. So let's say I write a story that allows Android users to purchase from the app. That is value to the end user, but there is really, or there was not really, an effective way to measure that. So linking and affiliating the code commits that relate to that story to the user story, and then seeing how it flows through the value stream, is how we measure value. That's how work items measure value. And that's a great question. Thank you.
All right, great. Our next question, excuse me, our next question is from Keith, and he asks, what are some common defect metrics for DevOps?
Wow, that is a great question. So there are 2 main areas that people use that involve defects. And the first one is risk. So modern DevOps platforms know what files are being touched within your code repo. And so number 1, if a file has a high number of defects associated with it, that file would be deemed as fragile, basically to mean that that file in the past has generated a lot of defects. So that is one way that defects are used. And then the second way is basically to measure value versus maintenance. So a lot of modern DevOps platforms measure user stories as new value and then defects as maintenance. And that's basically with the belief that we want to introduce more new value and less maintenance, and introduction of new technologies and tools, like if you think about things like machine learning, application monitoring, things that can prevent defects before they happen, that would be one way to measure that. So that's another great question. Thank you.
All right, Great. Moving along here. Next question is from John. What is your definition of every relevant metric?
Wow. So we have some great questions today. So every relevant metric, really, we can break it into kind of two portions. And the first one is around flow, how value flows or how our code commits flow through our value stream. So anything that you can measure around flow, we've found useful. And these are things like lead time, cycle time, as I said, efficiency, the distribution of work items across your value stream, and their aging. So in that aspect, you can identify which phases are taking longer than others to get value out to the next phase. That is one important aspect. Efficiency would be another big one. So we see that a lot of companies did not realize that value is sitting in a particular phase for a very long time, waiting for some small process to happen in order to make it to the next phase. So as I said, around flow, every common lean metric would be valuable. And then the second aspect would be risk. Around risk, there are a number of things that you can measure. I would say that top of mind would be row commits, and that is commits that are not associated to a business initiative. So if you have code commits that are not affiliated to a user story or a defect, that is kind of money lost, right? You have an investment and you don't know where it went, you can't track it, you don't know which release it's in. So that's a big one. I would say the second one would be commit distribution. That is, let's say, over the life of a feature, how much of the commit distribution is coming before you are code complete, and that is a measure of risk, right? So if you have most of your commits right before testing starts, that may show you things like a rush to complete a feature due to a deadline, and you really want to see kind of an even distribution there. And around risk, like I said, fragile files would be a very good one to measure, as well as value versus maintenance. Yeah. So, that's a great question. And as I said, the modern platforms have all of these kind of built in. If you think about a single pane of glass application that is talking to your entire stack, if this is configured properly, all of this will be measured automatically for you.
All right, great. Okay, let's see. We have so many good questions here, I got to tell you. But there is time. If you do have a question for Daniel, please feel free to use that control panel and get your question in before the end of the webinar. And if we have time, we will definitely get to it. Okay, next question. It's another one from a John. Not sure if it's the same John, but what is a DSL?
So a DSL is what we call a domain-specific language, and that is what allows configuration as code to be used in an efficient way. So let's say if we think about languages, if we know their paradigms, we know their formatting, we know their syntax. However, in configuration tools, there may not be any given language. Like a configuration tool may not come off the shelf in JavaScript or in Python. So they use what it's called domain-specific languages, and that is basically seen in the form of either YAML files or JSON files that have a common structure to illustrate or represent configuration elements with your stack. So that's all that means, basically. A domain-specific language is something that developers can ramp up quickly and identify how a piece of configuration lives within a given tool.
Okay, and then along those same lines, Rose is asking, could you please clarify what the distinction is between DSL and API?
Sure, absolutely. So a DSL is, as I said, the way in which we write configuration files for any given tool. And that is something that we oftentimes have to learn and have to get familiar with. And then an API is simply an interface that we can use to communicate with an application. So if you think about the way your version control system talks to your CI server, it's oftentimes through an API. So there may be a webhook call, or there may be an API call, and that is basically just a way to communicate among tools, and that is the difference.
Okay, great. Our next question is from Sebastian, and he is asking, what is the best practice for DevOps for a large enterprise? One DevOps by team?
Well, yeah. So that's a tough question.
Yeah.
There is no one size fits all. Like I said, depending on the process that you're following, you may be better suited to follow one process versus another. So this is just like Git flow. Git flow may not be right for all the people using Git, right? So just in that same vein, there is no one DevOps way for a large company. Now, with that said, I will say that in our services engagements, what we've had most success with is starting with a team that has complete autonomy over their applications. And what I mean by that is they not only do the development, but they also do anything that has to do with deployment, anything that has to do with hot swaps, and anything that has to do with maintenance. And that's where we see kind of this market moving towards, is that teams that are fully self-contained, that are responsible end-to-end for one aspect of your product. Now, if that's not possible, I would say that the most efficient way to start is with a small team that can make decisions on their own without much red tape. And that is kind of a big part of DevOps, is having independence within teams to make those types of calls.
Okay, great. Next question is from KLN Babu. How does the DevOps work in the waterfall model for SOR creation?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And when we talk about DevOps, more and more we see that has a direct correlation to Agile. And that's what we see most of the practice out there being. That's not to say that it's not possible to have an efficient flow with a waterfall model. So basically, a waterfall model just means that you have a bunch of work up front before your first code commit takes place. Now, the team that is doing that code commit and the team that is getting that application out the door can follow all of the same practices that an Agile team would follow. So I would say that the most important thing here is identifying either single team members that work on a common part of the product, or identifying teams that work in a service that has some similarity. And that way you can start practicing core tenets of DevOps, such as modern version control, continuous integration, automated testing. So all of those aspects can continue to be practiced even with waterfall. But like I said, the ideal place we want to get to is a fully autonomous team that is Agile plus DevOps.
All right, great. Our next question is from Helen, who asks, you mentioned capturing lean metrics such as lead time. We currently use multiple tools in our process and find it time-consuming to aggregate their data. How do you solve for this?
Yeah, so that's a great question. That's kind of what I mentioned, that some people have access to some metrics. And the reason for that is that nobody wants to take the time to go through each one of the tools in your stack and putting all of those stats in Excel and aggregating them and getting like common lead times. So that is a thing of the past. So modern DevOps platforms should be doing this for you automatically. Like I said, there are single pane of glass apps that connect to all of your apps, oftentimes via webhooks or just by polling them, and aggregate all of that data automatically for you. So how you solve for this is with a modern DevOps platform. And we'll leave some links for you at the end of the webinar. If you want to learn more about those, you can certainly contact us.
Great, okay, excellent. Next question is from Michael. How specifically do you affiliate code commits to work items? For example, user stories.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are a couple of ways of how companies are doing this today. The first one, and the most common one, would be that each comment for your commit contains a work item ID. And there are two ways to do this. The first one is manual, where a developer simply types in a work item ID along with the commit, and then your system affiliates that code with that work item automatically. Or the second one is with tools that are kind of check-in tools. So modern version control systems may enforce that you first choose a work item before you can check in this code. And that, basically different IDEs and VCS systems have this built in, where a developer will not be able to check code unless they first choose a work item or a user story to affiliate that code with. So that is kind of the first option. And then the second option is with branching. So what we've seen that a lot of companies like to do is have dedicated branches for each user story. So the platform will know that every code commit that comes in for this branch belongs to a certain story. And that is one way, as I said, is practice, but it's less common than the first way.
Okay, great. Next question is from Andrew on the compliance front. This sounds like maybe fighting words here. On the compliance front, are you suggesting developers take on compliance activities, or how can this be embedded in the process?
That's a great question, and I'm sorry that I was not then as clear as I thought I was. Definitely not. We're definitely not advocating that developers take on compliance duties. Basically, modern DevOps platforms allow you to specify activities for each one of your phases. So an activity, let's say in your staging phase, would be a compliance officer has to sign off on this, or a compliance system has to run a number of tests on this. So basically, every compliance activity would be assigned to the relevant person while it's still in the middle of the value stream. And as I said, modern DevOps platforms allow you to assign different activities to either a group of people or a single person, or if you want an automated activity to take place, you can do that as well. But what I mean to say with that is that this process, we should think about this as part of the software development process and not something that is done after the code is done. Because as I said, that generates not only waste, but a lot of times rework.
Yeah, sounds like the same conversation that a lot of people are having with security and DevOps these days too. Definitely. Okay, great. Doing a quick time check. We are at about 1:42 Eastern and got time, I think, for one more question here. And John has given us a really great one to wrap things up with. What would you say is the biggest challenge facing DevOps for 2018?
Wow, that is a very deep question, but thank you. It's a good one. I think that the biggest challenge that we've seen for DevOps is executive buy-in. And we find that at the places where we see executive buy-in, a DevOps implementation may be 100 times more successful versus places where they may be not as much buy-in, and we just think of this as an experiment, or we just think of this as something that may or may not work. So I think that the biggest challenge continues to be showing value to the leadership teams at different companies. And basically, we're getting better and better at this by just using things like case studies and using things like the built-in metrics to show the inefficiencies of certain things that we may practice today. But I would say that that continues to be the number one challenge we deal with here at CollabNet when we do this sorts of engagements, is getting that buy-in from the top. All
right. Great. Well, as I said, I think we are pretty much out of time for questions now. If we did not get to your question, please know that the fine folks at CollabNet are getting a copy of all the questions, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to follow up with you post-event. Also, John or Daniel, I think you said you got a couple links that you want to share with the audience?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So you can learn more about both our products and services at collab.net. And as you may or may not know, we recently merged both companies, CollabNet and Version 1. So you will find more information around our DevOps offering in both services and products at version1.com/DevOps.
Awesome. All right, great. Well, just a reminder, today's event has been recorded, so if you missed any or all of today's event, please know that you can access it on demand post-event today. We'll be sending out a link. If you register, then we'll be sending it to you via email. The webinar will also be on demand on DevOps.com. And also check out DevOps.com for other webinars that we have coming up. We've got a full roster of them, so hopefully there'll be something there to pique your interest. Daniel Grousseau, Product Manager at CollabNet, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a really fascinating webinar.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Charlene, and thank you very much to everyone that joined.
Great. Well, thank you. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off today. Have a great day, everybody.